I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We welcome the public to in-person participation. In addition, remote teleconferencing participation is available to board members and the public pursuant to the provisions of Government Code Section 54953E due to the COVID-19 state of emergency proclamation and recommendations for social distancing. Public comment. There will be multiple opportunities throughout this meeting for public comment. After I open an item for public comment, those joining us by webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you are joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. For those joining us in person, you are welcome to come to the podium. We ask that anyone making a public comment state their name and city of residence. You will then have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and we will notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comment to solvisable at ssabol@pctpa.net. Board action. Because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members, we ask that you state your name prior to making a motion or seconding a motion for the record. Once an item has been moved, and seconded, I will request the clerk to call the roll to vote. Thank you so much, and I'm wondering if, Ken, would you lead us in the flag salute? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, roll call.
Broadway.
Here.
Cartwright.
Here.
Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Holmes.
Here.
Howdeshelt.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Wilkins.
Here.
All right.
Okay, so MC, AB 361 remote teleconferencing. Matt, take it.
Yes, Madam Chair. So the governor's declared state of emergency, which allows us to meet under the relaxed teleconference rules, is set to expire the 28th, essentially next week. So beginning in March, the board will no longer be able to avail itself of the remote meeting options under AB 361. For the purposes of this meeting, the board needs to consider the state and the circumstances of the state of the emergency and their ability to continue to meet safely in person under the state's social distancing recommendations. We've evaluated the guidelines, and we ask that the board adopt findings to hold this meeting by remote teleconference due to the governor's state of emergency proclamation. So we're asking for action of adoption of Resolution 2304.
Dowden Calvillo makes the motion.
Home seconds.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Broadway.
Yes.
Cartwright.
Yes.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Yes.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so moving on to the item D, approval of the action minutes from January 25th, 2023.
Approval. Howdeshelt seconds.
Okay, a motion and a second. Roll call.
Broadway.
Yes.
Cartwright.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Yes.
Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, we now are at public comment. Speakers have 3 minutes under public comment. Oh, and I'm sorry. Thank you. Agenda review. Okay.
The spacing's really tight on that agenda, isn't it? One change to the agenda, you'll notice a pink memo in front of all of you relative to item M, which is the I-80 aux lanes. There's a change in the financial numbers, which David will cover in his presentation to you under item M. Besides that, the agenda and everything else holds.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second for the amended agenda? Oh, okay. All righty. Good. Okay, now, public comment. Speakers have 3 minutes under public comment to speak on issues that are not listed on the agenda unless the time is extended by the presiding officer. The Brown Act does not permit any action or discussion on items that are on the agenda, correct? Does not permit any action or, okay. Any public comment?
None here.
Okay, all right, then we'll move on to G. The consent calendar. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Anyone would like to remove anything?
I have none. Haudashelt moves consent calendar for the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency.
Broadway second.
Okay, roll call.
Broadway,
Yes.
Cartwright. Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Holmes,
Aye.
Howdashelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Aye.
Jones, Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, item H, consent calendar for the Airport Land Use Commission. These items are also expected to be routine and non-controversial, acted on by the board at one time without discussion. Would anyone care to pull this off the,
I have none.
okay?
Move approval.
Broadway second.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cartwright. Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Holmes,
Aye.
Howdashelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Joner.
Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, on to item I. Annual unmet transit needs report and assessment findings for fiscal year 2023-2024. And I believe we're going to hear from Mike Costa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone, members of the board and public. Mike Costa, I'm here to present the Annual Unmet Transit Needs Report and Findings for 23-24. This is one of PCTPA's responsibilities as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for Placer County. PCTPA administers the Transportation Development Act funding, or TDA for short. That funding produces 3 sources under TDA for our jurisdictions to use: local transportation funds, state transit assistance funds, and state of good repair funding. 2 of those funding sources, the STA and the SGR funding, go directly to transit operators for their transit operations and capital needs. The local transportation funds, or LTF, can actually be used both by transit operators and local jurisdictions for other purposes such as street and road maintenance. However, before LTF can be used for other purposes outside of transit, there has to be an annual unmet transit needs process done that determines that there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet for the next fiscal year, which is why we actually go through this process every year, because our local jurisdictions some of them do use LTF for other purposes. So what is an unmet transit need and what is reasonable to meet? That criteria is actually established and defined by the PCTPA board. The last version of these definitions was adopted last year in February of 2022. The unmet transit needs, in summary, is a service that doesn't exist or a service that's needed for ADA compliance, or Americans with Disability Acts compliance, For reasonable to meet, there's different criteria established for reasonable to meet, but in summary, reasonable to meet is a service that is going to be feasible and sustainable with existing funding. So that is an important factor when we look at unmet transit needs. They also have to be reasonable to meet in order to actually be something that we can address in the following fiscal year. The typical unmet transit needs process takes a few months, usually starting in either September or October. In this past cycle, we started in October with a survey that was released on the 1st of October. That survey was made available for a month and a half. And during that month and a half, we actually went out to all of the jurisdictions, including your boards and councils, to make a presentation on this item. And we solicited public comment on that survey to both identify potential unmet transit needs, but also to look at the state of transit and some of the very high-level understanding or needs out there regarding different transit services in Placer County. During the months of, after the survey closed, November and December, we evaluated all of the comments that we received based on the criteria in the previous slide. And then we brought this matter before the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, or SSTAC, which is something we have to do under the TDA guidelines for the unmet transit needs process. And so the SSTAC did review staff's evaluation and the proposed finding, and we're bringing now this item to the board here today to look at the report as well as to accept the finding. As I mentioned, we did a significant outreach. We even held a public hearing at this board in October for potential unmet transit needs as well. And then we did solicit comments in local newsletters. We made the survey available in various languages pursuant to our Title VI obligations. And we also had some information posted on buses and in local newsletters. So of the 127 comments that were evaluated during this cycle, 14 of those comments were actually determined to be unmet transit needs. However, they did not meet the criteria for reasonable to meet. Some of the themes that we saw are no surprise. Actually, some of these themes have reoccurred in previous cycles. But we did see a resonating theme on service connections between Lincoln, Rockland, Roseville, and Sacramento. Interregional services, that was a big request. We did, of course, also see service request needs to underserved or actually areas that are not served right now by public transit in Forest Hill and Sheridan. However, looking at those services, again, reasonable to meet criteria did not make it for Sheridan or Forest Hill. And then the other thing we looked at or saw as resonating themes was some other connections with Colfax and the greater Sacramento and Bay Area areas. So what I'm trying to say is the unmet transit needs process did identify needs out there. However, those needs didn't meet the criteria, but we can still evaluate those needs through other processes, such as our upcoming comprehensive operational analysis and short-range transit plan that we're going to be kicking off in spring of this year with our operators. So these types of service needs, while they don't meet the unmet transit needs criteria, they still are something that we can consider and evaluate addressing in the future as we look at our whole system of transportation in Placer County. So that's an important thing to note, that the unmet transit needs and our planning efforts are two different processes, but they complement each other, and it does afford us the opportunity to examine some of these needs outside of this process. So with that, as I mentioned, staff is recommending that there are no unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet in the next fiscal year, 23-24. And staff is also recommending that the board accept the findings and the report presented in your packet. This was concurred by the Transit Operators Working Group and the SSTAC, as well as the TAC at their respective meetings in January. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mike. I just need some information about the South Placer Transit Project, Rapid Link. Where are we with in the process of that?
That's a very good question, Supervisor Holmes. That process is being administered by the City of Roseville, their transit division, and there have been some delays in acquiring some of their bus equipment as well as some of their charging equipment because of the pandemic's impacts on supply chains. But it's anticipated that that service, which would start running I would call semi-express service, 30-minute frequent service from Lincoln to Roseville to the Watt I-80 light rail station. It's anticipated to still kickstart in December of this calendar year. So that's the current timeline. But again, there are some supply chain issues that are preventing the charging equipment from being fully established for that fully electric service, as well as the buses from being delivered on their original schedule. So we're hoping December, fingers crossed. But I think, as you saw in the previous slides, that some of this unmet transit needs between Lincoln, Roseville, and the Sacramento area could be addressed by that more frequent service that's going to be provided by the City of Roseville.
And where would that originate? Would it start in Lincoln, or?
It would start in Lincoln, and then it would connect to 3 locations as of right now in Roseville, which would be 2 of the hospitals, Sutter and Kaiser, as well as the Galleria transfer location. There's an option potentially to connect at one more location in Roseville, which I believe is the Taylor Road Park and Ride lot. but that's not yet on the table. And then it would go down to the Watt Avenue I-80 light rail station to provide connections to Sacramento, and that would be every 30 minutes, Monday through Friday.
Okay, that'll be a good improvement. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other discussion, questions?
I did have a question. And I'm reaching out to my own city staff on this, but on page 50 of the report, under annual ridership report for FY 2021-22, it shows that Auburn has a decrease in 24% of its annual trips per hour. And I have a document from my transportation folks that don't show, that the numbers don't click. So I'm not sure what numbers were used, but I don't show that kind of a decrease. I actually show an increase from the fiscal years.
Are you referring to on page, you said 50, the
Of the
change?
page 50 of the packet.
The
Yeah,
change
page
is
50.
referencing the vehicle revenue hours, not ridership.
Got it. Okay, vehicle revenue hours. Okay, and I'm looking at ridership numbers, so the two are different. Okay, thank you so much for the clarification. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great.
Tink, you're free to speak.
Oh, stink. There she goes. She's off mute. She had trouble with her system.
Now she's back on mute.
And now she's off. Tank, are you there?
Wonder if she doesn't have a right microphone linked to her.
Technology, when it works, it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's their system. Their kind of-
Tink, we see her off mute, but we're not hearing you.
Perhaps her microphone settings aren't right.
Tink, we're asking you to call back in because you're having some mic issues.
Your call.
Is she calling in? Well, since it's the only public comment, I hate to cut her off.
It's a synthesizer.
Yes, sounds like a musical instrument, huh?
A sitar, maybe.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, because Matt, you can also
Tink, go ahead,
decide
we'll go ahead and
directly
come back to your issue, maybe call back, maybe
into the number directly as well.
get off and then link back in again. And then I'll look for you and raise your hand. All right.
Okay, so it says we need to make findings and recommendations. Any,
Move approval.
Dowden Calvio, second.
okay,
How do we circle back around to take comments after we take an action? Yeah, well, there's a motion.
We could just hold the vote open.
Yeah, we'll hold the vote.
okay. Okay, Okay, then we'll move on to item J. Update regarding the Sierra College Fare-Free Student Transit Pass and Transportation Network Company Ride Subsidy Pilot Program. Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning again, everyone. I'm very pleased to bring this item as an update to the board at their request regarding our a partnership with Sierra College and the other transit operators in Placer County and Nevada County. This is an exciting effort that actually kickstarted last year. Well, I should say, excuse me, my colleague here, David Melko, kickstarted it off many years ago, and then the COVID pandemic hit, but it restarted back in late 2021. And then we were able to actually start this program in 2022. So in 2022-2023's budget, which was approved by the board back in June of last year, there was money set aside for this program, which was the pilot program that would be operated for 3 years in partnership with Sierra College and the transit operators to provide free rides to transit students that were accessing public transit to or from the Sierra College campus. The other component of this program was a partnership with a transportation network company, or TNC for short, and those are either Uber or Lyft or any other company that would also provide a discounted ride for students that were traveling to or from campus in the evening hours when public transit was not available. So those are the two components of the program. It was designed to benefit, again, the college's development. There was a lot of development going on at Sierra College. There still is, especially at their Rockland campus. It was designed to help mitigate some of that development, as well as provide access opportunities for students to reach campus and hopefully inspire more enrollment in classes and get more students back to campus, especially after the pandemic, and then generate more demand for public transit. As I mentioned, the first component of the Ride Free program, which is Ride Free with your Sierra College ID, consists of the free ride on public transit services. That began in September of 2022, concurrent with the fall semester at Sierra College. The participating operators are all 3 operators here in Placer County, as well as Nevada County Connects in Nevada County, and all 4 campuses for the Sierra College network are also participating. Right now, in the first quarter of that service, which was from September to December, there was approximately 10,000, almost 10,800 rides provided for free to students, and that was across all 4 campuses. And I want to correct one thing I stated earlier. This ride on transit can actually occur anywhere in the county as long as the student shows their ID and they are actively enrolled at Sierra College. They can use public transit not just to go to or from campus, they can use it to go to work, they can use it on the weekends. As long as they're actively enrolled at Sierra College, they can use public transit for free and show their ID. So that's a great benefit of this project, and that's what we're excited to offer. The TNC component, on the other hand, is restricted to just transportation to or from campuses. As I mentioned, that 10,000 ridership, 10,800 rides provided, you can see we're split up over the months of, August to December was the first quarter. But in the latter end of that quarter, you can kind of see a drop off in ridership. And that can be attributable to the fact that school ended, the semester ended, and students went on to break. And so one of the things that this shows us in our efforts moving forward, there was a big push both with the operators and with Sierra College to promote this to college students. That big push included emails sent out to the entire enrolled student population at Sierra College about the program. There was a dedicated webpage created for this program that all the students had access to that promoted the program, how it worked, and what to do when boarding a bus. And then the transit operators also respectively promoted this program through their various social media networks, on board their buses, and through their different websites and even some newsletters that were produced locally by some of our jurisdictions like Roseville and the county. So there was a lot of promotional effort, but it does go to show that I think there's more opportunity for education for students, that they can still use this service in the off time when they're not in school, because as long as they're enrolled, they can use the service. So even if they're on Christmas break, even if they're on Thanksgiving break, which we see the big drop off on ridership, we're hopeful that in the future, as we continue our partnership and collaboration with the operators in college, that we can continue to promote the service so that it's used even in the times when school might not be in full service. So that's something that we're going to be looking at moving forward. The other thing that we're still looking at that has not yet been fully established is that partnership with a TNC network company. Now, according to all of the discussions and collaboration we've had with Sierra College and the transit operators, Sierra College is the entity that would be entering into that partnership with a TNC. And in exploring that partnership, there were some concerns regarding liability that are still being flushed out and risk, but those discussions are still ongoing, and we're hopeful that in the next couple of months, we will kickstart the TNC component of this two-part pilot program. And then moving forward, like I mentioned, we're going to continue to partner with and promote the program with various different stakeholders, including the student government, which is starting to become involved in this effort, because we do want the student government to eventually, after the 3-year program ends, take ownership of the program to the point where they would want to fund or self-help to fund this program through maybe their own initiative or ballot measure that would be having to adopt by the student body. And so that's something we want to bring in the student government now at the first year of this 3-year pilot program to get them really engaged and to get them to own the program, as well as partner with different stakeholders like, for instance, the Galleria, which has a large amount of student employees that Sierra College already has some partnerships with to cross that employment between the college and the Galleria, and looking at ways that we can promote this program to help with employment transportation, and as well as looking at a benefit of this program to help us with just designing or improving our transit services in general. As I mentioned earlier in my previous item, we are going to be kickstarting in the spring a comprehensive operational analysis and short-range transit plan for our entire transportation network, all 3 transit operators. We're hopeful that through this partnership, again, in this pilot program, we can get some good insight, at least from the Sierra College population and students, on how to help design this system moving forward to improve our services in Placer County. So those are kind of the next steps for the program. I just wanted to provide this update to the board today. I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but that does conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions?
I have a couple. Thank you for the information. With 32% of the respondents in their survey not being aware at all of the program, have they taken a look at the social media communications and other opportunities they have? I know some of the references there talk to things that I would probably be more accustomed to seeing, because I'm not going to be as active on Instagram and Twitter and other platforms, but the students likely would be. So do we know how much time they're putting towards that, especially relative to tools that they use and social media that's used on campus to help with that? Because 32% seems like an awfully high number on a survey of students where there was a hard push to communicate this.
That's a very good question, Director Broadway. I am not entirely sure of their maximum effort on how much social media they push and how often they push it. I do know from the transit operator side that the transit operators have been continually pushing on almost a monthly basis, if not bi-monthly, information about this program. The college, I know, has kind of their own mechanisms in place, and they have been pushing predominantly through email channels and their website. I know they did some push on social media, but I don't know how they evaluate that. So that's something moving forward. I can definitely work with the college to improve, or at least to understand better their effort on pushing this program outside of their website, outside of their direct email to students, and that sort of effort to see if we can get additional awareness that's not being captured right now.
And given the ability for the students to utilize this, not just for the transit to school, but also to work, working with the local chambers would be an outstanding opportunity to connect with the businesses to ensure that there's awareness regarding the program when they're hiring the college students. So another opportunity, I believe.
Absolutely, that's a great suggestion.
I'm sorry, Director Broadway, please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you give me the floor, I might talk all day. If you want to talk, are you going to speak to that specifically, or?
No, well, I was going to just talk about advertising I wanted to talk about that, so.
Okay, if you don't mind, I just have two other quick points for me. One is, we talk about the college students. So have we had any further discussions about students and staff? We're looking at reducing the amount of transit individuals in cars as opposed to getting them utilizing our transit solutions. Have we had any additional discussions? I know this is a pilot, but providing that also to staff. I think that's an excellent opportunity, not only to increase usage, but also to communicate it to the students when they see staff members utilizing that as a solution as well. So something I want to continue to ask that we discuss.
Sure.
And I know there may be differences in how that's funded and how it's approached, but certainly I would like to see us continue that discussion. And then finally, in regards to the TNC, have we looked at any of the other programs? I know we have other programs in the state where colleges are using similar programs and they have the TNC solution. Have we looked at what they're doing to address the issues relative to the concerns that they have on the administrative side?
We have, and actually one of the larger programs currently being implemented by the University of California, LA, or UCLA, is a direct partnership with Lyft for something similar. It's actually even more extensive and more direct that the college is taking on some of the transportation, and I've had conversations with UCLA, and I think with the college there is a unique situation that they're just, I think it's for lack of better words, I think it's just a matter of continuing education to assess, to have the college fully understand the program so that they can understand the risk associated with that program. And what's interesting also with the college is they currently utilize an outside insurance consortium, so to speak. And it's that consortium that's telling them no, that we're not going to insure this. And so I think there's some additional work that we're doing, and I am continuing to have discussions with the college to help bridge that gap of understanding of what this program is, where the risk points are being assessed, and finding out what's the true concern from the college, and whether or not they're okay with some of the risk or they're not okay with the risk. When I talked to UCLA, they didn't assess this as a risk flow program because Lyft is providing all of the rides, they're just providing subsidies. So I'm not, again, quite sure, based on some of my communications with the college, where the exact concern is, but we're still having ongoing discussions to try to flush that out.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, and thank you for the presentation. If you adjust for the number of classroom days in December, looking at the time frame, 180 rides per day, I think is a great start. I know we can improve upon that, but it is an outstanding start. So thank you and for the report and for all the hard work on this.
Absolutely.
Okay, yes. Councilwoman Calvio.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, Ken. I didn't mean to interrupt you again. I wanted to thank you very much for the report too. I've been very excited, and I continue to be very excited about this particular project. Yes, there can be improvements, but I think we are off to a great start. I just wanted to suggest, maybe, I know that we're hitting the social media, or the school's hitting the social media and so forth, but it might be advantageous, and maybe they've already done this, but to also maybe have some flyers. I know we're always moving towards electronic communication, but in some of the areas on campus where students gather, I went to Davis, the MU is a perfect location, but if there, the library or other areas where a lot of students gather, it'd be great if they had that advertisement there. And then also I was thinking, and I don't know what the requirements are or the prohibitions at the Galleria or some place like that, where we know a lot of college students also see, our college students probably also visit. So just to kind of maximize that, the notification and advertising. So just a couple of suggestions, but otherwise I'm just really pleased to see this move forward, and looking forward to continued success. Thank you.
Chair Jones, Are we advertising in high school? Because I know there are some dual enrollments, right, between high schools and,
There is a program that Sierra College offers to high school students that are actively enrolled in Sierra College for higher level courses. And those, it's called the Godoti program, and those students are eligible to ride for free because they are a Sierra College student. So anyone from high school that's participating in Sierra College's Godoti program, in fact, one of our colleagues' son is actually in that program, and he is actively using public transit because he has the free ride through Sierra College.
great.
But we haven't promoted to high school by itself. It's just the Godoti program students as of right now.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, that was information only, so I'm told that we can go back now to our unmet transit needs. We have comments from Tink.
We do, so I'm just going to read her comment, and she said, I wanted to say that as a member of the SSTAC, I did participate in the discussions and voted to accept the recommendation that these requests are not reasonable to meet in this next fiscal year. However, we do need to carry these requests forward in our other planning processes for future years and not lose focus on the rapidly increasing population of older adults, which coincides with onset of disabilities. We have to look at the budget for CTSA and plan for expansion and innovation of those services. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
So you have a motion and a second.
All right.
Okay,
Take
here we
roll call
go.
vote.
I'm still on. Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cartwright. Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner. Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you, Mike, for that report. Moving on to item K, fiscal year 2023-24 preliminary findings of apportionment for the local transportation fund and state transit assistant, state of good repair fund allocation estimates. So Corey Peterson.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, members of the board, and apologize I could not be there in person, but unfortunately my house was invaded with a virus called COVID. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of it. So rather than share the love, I decided best to be here on camera with you. But enough about me and my illness troubles. Let's talk TDA. Is the slide deck up? There we go. Okay, so twice a year, the PCTPA staff brings before you the TDA recommendations for a preliminary and final apportionment. So this comes into 3 buckets of funding, and I'll talk about each of them in turn. We can kind of go through with some of the, excuse me, I'm going to try and get through this without coughing too much. The 3 buckets of funding, and we'll kind of talk about each one, starting with the Local Transportation Fund, or LTF. And this is funded through sales tax revenues that are collected by the state and then returned to the county in which they were collected. Next slide. These typically pay for pedestrian road improvements, but primarily transit. After transit uses, that's when they can go down to road improvements, as you saw through the unmet transit needs process. This chart shows the historical LTF revenue that we've gotten over the last 10 years or so. So you can see that coming out of the last recession, we're seeing pretty consistent growth in our revenue. We had a little blip at the beginning of the pandemic, after which we actually started to accelerate our growth even further after that. Next slide. So this graph kind of shows the growth of the revenue through the pandemic month by month. So you can see right here on the left in fiscal year 1920, there was a little bit of a blip at the start of the pandemic, but overall, other than some, major spikes around the holiday, Christmas shopping season, we've been pretty consistent in terms of our revenue growth across the pandemic. Next slide. Now for our outlook for 23-24. So the purpose of this presentation is to look at the preliminary findings for fiscal year 23-24. And we kind of took a look at some economic data. And some of you may remember that we used to have HDL, the economic firm, on board to help us with some of our sales tax revenue projections. Well, they also post some public reports on sales tax projections in California. So 21-22 Q4 over previous year, we're seeing seeing our gross receipts in Placer County go up. However, with the impending potential recession, our outlook for 23-24 is a lot more cautious, and so they're actually projecting only about a 0.4 increase in sales tax revenue. We're anticipating a slight decline in auto sales and fuel sales, as well as increasing in restaurants and travel, as well as building, as our county continues to grow and as people start to travel more and go out more post-pandemic. But I think overarching all of this is the uncertainties of a potential recession. So that kind of leads me into my next slide. So after discussing, the staff has decided to go with a slightly more conservative growth rate than some of the past years of 0.4%. So this growth rate shows how much we think that our sales tax revenue will grow by in fiscal year 23-24. So this will kind of help us cover in case of a potential recession. For our 23-24 apportionment, we're looking at about $31.2 million. And that includes a carryover from this fiscal year of about just over $1 million. And of that, about 29.9 is available to your local agencies. So one thing to note is that this is about 3.7 less than the final apportionment from this current fiscal year, 22-23. However, we will be coming back with the final apportionment later on this year. And in past fiscal years, we've seen the numbers change to where we have more revenue than expected. So this is not a final number. We'll be coming back with some more updated numbers later on this year. Next slide. So this is just a graphical representation of the apportionments by jurisdiction. I won't read all of this, but kind of shows, that it's apportioned by population. So Roseville, it's about 11 million, all the way down to Colfax, it's just over 100,000. The Tahoe Basin's getting about 700,000. And then we also set aside about 2% for our bicycle and pedestrian fund, as well as 4.5% for the CTSA. Next slide. Okay, so next one is the State Transit Assistance Fund, or STA. So this is funded primarily through the sale of diesel fuel, and it pays specifically for transit operations and capital. Next slide. STA is broken up into two different buckets that are apportioned a little bit differently. So you'll see there's a blue and an orange line that represent these two different buckets. So the 99313 represents the revenues that are apportioned by population. And so these, you can see, have continued to grow along with the sale of diesel fuel, whereas the second line, 99314, is apportioned by fare revenue. And that's most that is dipped during the pandemic and has been growing slowly ever since. Next slide. So for STA, we get these estimates from the State Controller's Office every year in February and August. So for 23-24, we're looking at about $4.2 million in STA funds coming to Placer County, most of which go to the population formula of 3.6, and a small amount that are apportioned based on fare revenue. And this is about 5% less overall than our current fiscal year's apportionment. But again, we'll be coming back with updated numbers for you in August or September. Next slide. This just shows a graphical representation of how much each jurisdiction is getting. So each jurisdiction is a portion of it based on their population and fare revenue for those that operate transit. And then the CTSA also takes a small percentage of our STA revenue as well. Next slide. Okay. So the third one is the state of good repair. And this was actually added on after the passage of SB1. So this state of good repair is funded through the sale of the fuel excise taxes, and this primarily goes to transit capital to help kind of bring the transit systems back into a state of good repair, so it can pay for new buses or replacing infrastructure. Next slide. Similar to STA, this is also apportioned by population and by fare revenue in two different buckets. And you can see that overall, our revenue has been slowly increasing across the board. Even through the pandemic, we didn't really see too much of a dip in SGR revenue. Next slide. Okay, so for this year, we're looking at receiving about 589,000, most of which will go through population formulas, as well as a little bit into the fare revenue formula. It should be noted that for SGR, this can only be claimed by transit operators. So this is only claimed by the City of Auburn, Placer County, and the City of Roseville, since they're the only jurisdictions that operate transit. And this is a little bit higher than 22 and 23 apportionment. So we'll be looking at getting your updated numbers later on this year. And then this is just a representation of what each jurisdiction will get this fiscal year. Next slide. Okay, so next steps. So we received a TAC concurrence to move this to the board back in their meeting earlier this month. As I mentioned, the final apportionments for 23-24 will be released on August 1st. And so we'll be coming back to this board for adoption of the final apportionments either at the August or September meeting later this year. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm asking for approval of the apportionments and revenue estimates for LTF, STA, and SGR. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
I have no good report.
Any of our board members online? No? Public?
No members of the public here.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we're asking.
Move approval of the FY 23-24 preliminary findings of apportionment for the local transportation fund, the preliminary state transit assistance fund allocation estimates, and the preliminary state of good repair fund allocation estimate.
Broadway will second.
Okay, roll call.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cartwright. Aye. Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Holmes,
Aye.
Howdeshelt,
Aye.
Joyner, Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item L, preliminary draft fiscal year 2023-2024 overall work program and budget. So this is Matt and Jody.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it's generally largely Jody, right? She's done all the hard work
You're
here.
gonna introduce her.
Just as she's getting set up to give you the presentation, I'll let you know as far as the OWP, a lot of good work by Jody and the team. Generally, the OWP is unchanged, and I think we're in very good shape, but I'll let her go through the slides and give you the details. Jody?
Okay.
Good morning, Chair and
Morning.
Board. I'm presenting to you today the preliminary budget for 22-23 fiscal year. The assumptions used in this budget were fairly flat to this year. We did add 3% to the COLA based on our personnel policy and updated the PERS rates as well as our contribution for the unfunded PERS liability. And our local transportation fund, I wanted to mention, is flat. After Corey's presentation, it will be adjusted in the final budget that will be presented to you in May. And we are presenting to you a balanced budget today. Right now, there is a surplus of $42,000, which will be going away after we get the LTF contribution. This was a collaborative effort of all the staff at PCTPA to update this budget. And the fund, and I did want to mention that the fund balance is within guidelines of at least 15%, and it does assist us with cash flow purposes. And just to look at our revenue, over 41% of our funds are received on a reimbursable basis, which is why that fund balance is so important to us. And we do receive funds in various different methods. From that pie chart, it did adjust a little bit this year because we have spent down many of our grants for some of the work elements. And here's a look at our expenditures. The bulk of the expenditures, or 89%, go directly to work elements, and the remaining 11% is for the operating cost of PCTPA. And this busy chart is a look at all of our work elements and where our expenditures are placed. The blue is the preliminary budget, and the orange lines are the current Amendment 1 of this year. You'll see the larger changes are the work element 44, which is State Route 49 sidewalk gap closure, as we phase out of the design and right-of-way and move into another phase of that. Those expenditures drop pretty drastically next year. And then we see some changes in our SACOG MPO planning. And of the 14,560 hours of the 7.0 FTE of PCTPA, this is how the hours are allocated as compared with the current fiscal year. Again, the blue is the preliminary budget, and the orange is this current fiscal year. And just to review some of the major changes in the budget, the staff and benefits have been adjusted to reflect staff workload changes, as well as the 3% increase in the salary schedule. Direct cost, work element 46, which is our mobility action plan, is ending in this fiscal year and is not in the budget for 23-24. As I mentioned, the Highway 49 sidewalk gap closure is moving into a different phase, and there's planning to be less expenditures for next fiscal year. Work element 100, which is SPART administration, has been adjusted to reduce the consultant fees for the modeling and fees review. And lastly, work element 61, which is the funding strategy. We are ramping up the outreach for that, and the contribution for the South County jurisdictions is up to $400,000 for next fiscal year. And then we did increase some of our indirect, which was to support staff growth and training, which we did increase training fees $13,000 over this current fiscal year. And this has been presented and concurred by the TAC to bring to you today, and is in review with Caltrans, and staff recommends approval, unless you have any questions.
Any questions by board members?
Maybe a question or a comment. So the first thing is, Matt, I'm really pleased to see the increased focus on SACOG coming up. I think most of you know, but if you don't, we've been forced into a 6-county funding round coming up in the future. That's going to be a real battleground for us, and we really need to have our A game down there. So I'm really pleased to see that. With respect to the funding plan, what are we going to do different this time around? We've been doing the same thing we've always done, hoping for a different outcome. How are we going to change this up?
Now that's a big question. I think one of the things that we're going to do that's really, well, gosh, I don't know if it's fundamentally different, but we're going to have a very targeted communications and marketing strategy that's going to employ a digital strategy. It's going to employ a social strategy, and then it's also going to employ what I guess I'll call a sort of a ground game, where we're going to have a lot of hosted events with folks in the communities, right? So one of the things, if you if you look at the polling, really the general public doesn't know who PCTPA is, right? And if you were to look at our LinkedIn, we have 199 followers. Wait, we have 200. We got one more last week. But if we look at the county and the cities, those brands all poll very high. There's high favorables for the county in general, and there's 3 cities in the district. So One is, how do we come alongside and utilize sort of that brand recognition of the cities and the counties to help with our ground game? So there's going to be, there's going to be sort of conversations with, all of you all are going to be reached out to be, part of the strategy, to host meetings, to do things like that. I personally think it's going to be a combination of the ground game, a very focused digital strategy, and truthfully, a lot of it's going to come down to timing, right? If we're gonna sort of have an honest conversation, we're going to do all of that work because we have to do that work because we want to run through the tape, right? We don't want to sort of pull up. And it's going to come down to 500 votes, 1,000 votes, a couple thousand votes, something like that. But truthfully, the big question, as I look at it, is where's the country going to be in sort of September of '24? How hard of a recession are we going to have? Is it going to be soft? How are we going to come out of that? Where's gas going to be? If you look at what sort of the American public think right now, and then folks in California, and then specifically in Placer, and more specifically in the district that we poll, we sit here at a transportation body, we care about it. It's not even in the top 7 concerns. Number one concern for people in this sort of funding measure district is inflation. Number 2 is housing affordability. Number 3 is homelessness. And then this and that and this, and around down 7 or 8 is transportation. And it's really going to be hard for us to affect that change in a really robust way. And so part of this is doing all of that work to fight hard for those couple thousand votes. But I would say where the country is gonna, and where we are economically is gonna have a large impact on our ability to be successful in November of '24. And then I also think we have to do an extremely good job at explaining what this is on the ballot measure itself. Because after we do all of this work for 18 months, still a vast majority of the people, the first time they're going to hear about this is when they open their ballot and they read the measure. And so what those 75 plus words say and how we articulate what the folks are voting for is extremely important. So if you asked me to handicap it, I'd say at a macroeconomic level, where's the country? Where's California? Where's Placer? Where's the district? Number one. And then, I think that's probably the most profound. How do we describe it? How is that relative to the expenditure plan and the commitments we've made to the public? And then everything we are going to do that you see reflected in the work program and all the work you'll see myself and others do over the next 20 months to sort of fight for a couple thousand votes.
So I think within that, the piece that did address my question was the wording of the actual ballot measure.
Yeah.
So we need to focus on how we would change that. We've used very much the same language each time we've put that out there and polled on it, or actually put it on the ballot as Measure M. I guess the other question I would have along those lines, I'm just concerned that we keep chasing this thing in very much the same way every time. And we've got I think the first strategy meeting coming up this week or next.
Next week. Yeah.
And I'll certainly be there for that, but it's the old adage about doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. And I heard a lot of what you were talking about, we've already done. I'm worried that our message to those that we can reach is at saturation point. We're beginning to see a fall off of the number of people that attend the events to get that information. So how do we change it up? How do we reach a new audience? How do we really have an impact there?
Yeah, and let me try to address that, because I know I didn't do a great job. We know that we have hard yeses and we know that we have hard no's. And then we have 2 camps inside of the polling that we'd call a soft no or a swing vote. And so I guess the only thing I can say is relative to sort of the digital and creative campaign, all of the messaging is going to be firmly focused on the soft no's and the swing votes. And those swing votes right now are 25%. And so how do we, and we know who they are by gender, we know who they are by party, we know who they are by age. And so we are going to be, we're not going to spend some of those very limited resources on the people we already have or the people we could never get. So we will be firmly focused on the swing and the soft, I would say swing first and soft nose second, because the soft nose are hard to get to.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, that's a good one. Got me warmed up.
Madam Chair, without turning this into a funding strategy focused conversation, as I heard you lay out, and it's indicative in all survey results, what's top of mind for the voters is often a perception of what should be top of mind for the voters and driven by the mass media. And what I didn't hear and what I would encourage and will encourage is that there be not just the ground game, but there be the perception change, right? If we talk about flood, people who aren't even flooded know about flood.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk about, and we have to embrace congestion as our ally, and we have to magnify those tiny little inconveniences on Highway 65. And we have to be visionary about what the congestion will be coming because of what's happening in the area. So thanks for letting me diatribe.
You bet. Any other comments or questions? Any online? Okay. So we need to approve the preliminary draft.
Joiner seconds.
Okay, roll call then.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cartwright, Dowden Calvillo,
Aye.
Holmes,
Aye.
Howdenschelt,
Aye.
Joyner,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item M, I-80 Auxiliary Lanes Project, construction cost increase and cooperative agreement amendment. So David is going to,
I have this item. Thank you,
Okay.
Madam Chair. So I have a brief PowerPoint presentation, about 8 slides, that cover the detail in the staff report. So just as background here, you need to build a project here on the interstate freeway system, and with Caltrans having the responsibility and us doing the planning and the environmental and design, we need a construction cooperative agreement. And the board approved a construction cooperative agreement back in March of 2022. And on that same day, later that day, the Sparta board approved project funding allocation up to $10.4 million. And the approved construction budget at the time, as part of the cooperative agreement, was $32.133 million. And it consists of primarily state funds, but also federal and local funds, the local funds being Sparta funds. And all of this funding has been arranged by us. And just for maybe more for the viewing audience, but this Interstate 80 Aux Lanes project consists of 2 segments. The eastbound segment is truly an aux lane project. The westbound segment is actually a new 5th lane, so it's a mainline freeway lane, probably one of the last ones to be built in this state under current rules. That's my opinion, not necessarily PCTPA's opinion. The actions we're requesting today from the board is that you conditionally approve entering into an amended construction cooperative agreement with Caltrans, and that you authorize the chair and the executive director to execute an amended cooperative agreement. And your action today is conditional, subject to the Sparta board approving an increased project funding commitment not to exceed $15.7 million. Okay. So why are we asking for more money? Okay, so there's a construction cost increase that we need to address. The construction bids were posted January 26. Over 12 and a half weeks were allowed for the bid period. 6 bids were received. The bids range from $36.65 million to over $43.5 million. The top 3 bids were very close. They were within 2% of each other. The low bid of $36.65 was considered responsive and reasonable. To award the contract, we need $40.71 million, which leaves us with a shortfall of $8.58 million. and that additional funding needs to come from PCTPA and Caltrans. And the cost overrun responsibility, depending upon how you view it, differs between westbound and eastbound segments. And the state share, and you notice in the pink paper staff report, has been revised. The state share has been reduced to 2.04 million, and PCTPA share has increased to 6.54 million. And there are reasons that we recommend that we should continue to move going forward. We consider rescoping and rebidding options, and rescoping the project would not meet the approved state grant funding scope. If the project is canceled or significantly delayed, the state grant funds would be forfeited, and would also impact our ability to secure future state funds. And I'll remind the board that we submitted in December a grant application for Solutions for Congested Corridor Cycle 3 funds to support the Capital Corridor third track project to Roseville. And so those fundings could be jeopardized if we forfeited funds that we previously received. And the competition was considered good. 6 bids, top 3 bids were close, and the opinion on staff, both Caltrans and us, is that rebidding will not result in lower prices. And based on the bidder debriefings, the factors that contributed to the cost increase were consistent across all bids. So there wasn't any difference other than just how the bidders costed the project. And so the conclusion is that both Caltrans and PCTPA recommend going forward with the project. So, in addition, we have a cost overrun with our partner PG&E. PG&E is required to remove and relocate 2 gas pipelines conflicting with the construction of the westbound segment. And the original estimate was, round numbers, $255,000, and this board approved the utility agreement in September of 2021. And the utility agreement is based on a master agreement that the state negotiated with PG&E back in the early 2000s, and it's a 50-50 share. And so we are the 50% share for the state. And PG&E submitted in October an invoice for $655,000. You can imagine my reaction when I received that. And we've been continuing discussions with PG&E since then, conference calls, site visits to get a better understanding. And at this point in time, if everything holds true, we will need $200,000 in additional funding from us, to pay our 50% share. I will point out that there are still items that PG&E owes us in order for us to say that the costs are reasonable. And once we get that all cleared up, we will bring an amended utility agreement sometime between March and May. I really think it'll probably be May, just based on how things have been moving. So the funding need. So we are responsible for the construction cost increase plus PG&E overrun, so the total is $6.74 million. And we have right now funding a project reserve of about $1.47 million that will offset that cost. And those were set aside last March because the inflationary environment seemed to be changing last March, and so we put some money aside in a reserve in anticipation of that. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. So we will require $5.3 million rounded from Sparta to meet our funding responsibility. And that's scheduled later today for the Sparta board meeting, that allocation request. And Caltrans anticipates taking their share, the $2 million and change, to the CTC for approval in March. I will note that the Caltrans going to the CTC in March is an expedited request on Caltrans' part, and we are still not sure as to whether or not it will make the March meeting. And if it doesn't go to the March meeting, it would then go to the May meeting. So, and which would then impact our overall project construction schedule. So just to recap, and I'll just focus on the rightmost column, the total. The existing budget was $32.133 million, and we're now up to $40.7 million. The funding need is, in round numbers, $8.6 million, and then you add the $200,000 from PG&E, and so there is approximately $8.78 million that is needed, and our responsibility is $6.74. A reminder, we have $1.47 in reserve funds. That's why we're going to Sparta and asking for $5.3 million, and the state is responsible for $2 million and some change. And just to recap, we went over this last month when we did the mitigation agreements, project schedule. You know, the bids were advertised in October, so they were given over 12 and a half weeks for the bids. And we opened them on January 26th. At this point, the estimate, if everything holds true, is Caltrans would approve a contract in April, and the notice to proceed would be issued in August, and the project under 240 working days would be completed in July. I did note to you that if Caltrans does not go to the CTC in March and goes in May, that the construction completion date probably would shift to October 2024. And with that, our recommendation is that you conditionally approve entering into an amended construction cooperative agreement with Caltrans. You authorize the chair and the executive director to sign such agreement. And both the PCTPA and Sparta Technical Advisory Committees concurred with the staff recommendation. And your action today is subject to Sparta approving an increased project funding commitment of not to exceed $15.7 million. And I'd be glad to take any questions.
Questions, board members? Yes, please.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, this stuff's always fun between midday and then getting the contract awarded. Do you know how much funding is in the Sparta program?
I will defer to our deputy director, Rick Carter, because he administers the Sparta program.
Okay.
Are you asking in terms of the current balance in the account?
My understanding is the source of the funds in Sparta is development impact fees.
Correct.
And I'm not clear as to, is this 5 million out of, that's coming from Sparta, is it 5 million out of 50 million, or is it 5 million out of 8 million, in terms of a fund balance there, in terms of how significant of a hit it is?
Yeah. I don't remember the value off the top of my head, but we did do an analysis of the added cost in impacting the schedule of projects to be delivered. We have a program of projects that goes out just a few years from now with dollar values for certain projects. We do have sufficient fund balance for the additional 5 million without impacting anything that's currently programmed.
Right, and these questions are more probably of interest to the Sparta board than PCTPA. Our action would be contingent on Sparta approving really what is the lion's share of the additional funding that's necessary.
Correct.
So from a PCTPA standpoint, it's fairly straightforward. The heavier lift will be with Sparta, but it sounds like the technical advisory committees with Sparta are recommending that this move forward, so.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And the cash flow was discussed and presented with both TACs.
Additional questions?
Yeah, I do. This,
Sparta's sitting down here going, I don't know about this.
well, I want to make sure I understood what I thought I heard. Did you say that if we don't go forward with this, the third track? Can you explain that again?
Sure. So, right, this project, I'm going to go back a couple of slides. Excuse me, went wrong way. The blue, the location 1 eastbound auxiliary lane, is funded with the Solutions for Congested Corridor program. And we received those funds, actually Caltrans directly receives those funds, although we did the application and the planning documentation. So if we do not move forward with these projects, these two segments, those funds would have to be returned to the state. And we currently have a Solutions for Congested Corridor application in play right now, cycle 3, that we submitted in December. And there is the possibility that if you have a project currently awarded with Solutions for Congested Corridor program funding, and you decide not to move forward with it and return those funds to the state, that could be viewed negatively with respect to then us coming back and asking for more funds for a different project. And even though it's a different project,
Okay.
you just.
I get it, thank
Yeah.
you. Now I understand it.
Okay.
So I'm reading the staff report. So the eastbound segment is funded through that Solutions for Congested Corridors.
Right.
But the westbound segment is through the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program.
Right.
I'm going to ask my Sparta member to the right whether his trucks go just west or do they go east-west?
Well, the reason, just.
Only left-hand turns.
Only.
No left hands, right.
Right.
For the viewing audience, hello out there, right? I mean, that's the reason why on the eastbound side, we have to pay more. I'm
Well,
pretty sure
yeah.
it's since the Central Pacific started operating trains, they went east.
Trucks go both ways. It's the interstate, it's a major freight corridor in the United States, continental, across the United States. The aux lane that's showed for location 1 eastbound is an eligible project under the Solutions for Congested Corridor program because it's considered a safety project. It's not considered a capacity increasing project. And so we pursued the funding for that segment because it met those requirements. The green location, location 2, the westbound, is a new capacity increasing project on the freeway. And the only state program that allows for that is the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. And we
I'm just gonna take a soapbox right now. I don't,
Yeah, so.
Because my colleague to the left had a colleague on the Lincoln City Council in August of 2022 get hit by a truck for that safety thing. So I don't know where you draw the line. I'm pissed off, This is crazy. This is the same thing we're running into, with the federal, state, local proportionment. And the reality is, we're all citizens of the United States, citizens of the state of California, and that money ought to flow. So I don't know what I can do about it except wake up here and start articulating my anger.
I can assure you that that as staff, we all have similar feelings. But in terms of moving forward with the project and finding funding to match project segments, the only fund source that met doing a new 5th lane on the westbound segment was the Trade Corridor. And it fit because the interstate is a major east-west continental freight corridor. And so we were successful in getting funding for that particular project. And that funding has a different share of responsibility for cost overruns than the other funding source. And that is why it is divvied up the way it is.
There was
Wish
a
I could
movie
change
in
the rules, but I can't.
There was a movie in 1976 called Network.
Yes.
And there's a classic line.
He's mad as hell,
Yeah.
and he's not going to take it anymore.
Well, I can assure you on the days when we got the bids and then the PG&E cost estimate, I was probably channeling Network.
So I'm glad you circled back around to that. It's minor in the scope of things here, but why should we be responsible for PG&E's overruns?
Well, so we do need to remove and relocate the gas pipelines because they do conflict with building that westbound fifth lane. The agreement that the state has with PG&E, Master Freeway Agreement, says everything is 50-50. And we have a cost estimate that apparently was underestimated by a large amount.
By whom?
By PG&E. And we have had several conference calls, field visit, and the way they described the issues associated with the removal of the pipeline were issues that they just didn't pull together when they did their original estimate. And so we have a cost increase, and under the state agreement, we're responsible for 50%. Now, we need to make the finding that they are reasonable, and we are working through that right now. And so once we get that documentation and we come to the conclusion as staff that it's reasonable, then the next step would be to come back to this board with an amended utility agreement. And of course, at that point in time, you can grill me in terms of whether or not it's
No,
reasonable.
this isn't about you. This is about PG&E.
Yeah.
This is about what appears to be their mistake, 50% of their mistake being passed on to us to cover. That's all.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing is that had they done their work right, we would have had the pain earlier and not, but it sounds like they didn't do their, yeah.
It's,
I
if you
thought
live
they
in the
had a
state of
new-
California right now, you're pretty ticked off at PG&E across the board, and so to hear something like this, just,
With that, I'll conditionally, oh, wait.
if I may.
There's somebody else is upset.
Chair Jones said, you two can continue the discussion with PG&E. I think we're all real thrilled with them these days. But a question for you, David, in relationship to the auxiliary lanes, I know that the Rockland Road I-80 interchange project now, that Caltrans in their infinite wisdom has decided that there needs to be enhancements to the westbound lane, but that is not part of this project, though the enhancements to the interchange there is not necessarily going to increase the volume or the movement of traffic. That would have been part of our plan and part of Caltrans' plans all along. Do we know how that was missed and how we're going to look at that from a funding perspective? I know we have approved the funding for the engineering and the study for that, but how was that not included, and then how will we address that in the future when that moves forward? Because that will be part of that improvement to the interchange.
Yeah, I really can't speak to why the westbound auxiliary lane now being discussed for the Rockland Road interchange project was not included with this original project. I do know that there were merging and weaving concerns coming off the interchange with people quickly having to merge into the main line and then to quickly merge back to Rockland Road off-ramp, to get to Sierra College or into downtown Rockland or other parts of Rockland. And so that's been a concern that's been identified probably for 20 years. But I don't really have the background as to why the westbound was never part of the discussions here.
But this will be coming back to this body at some point relative to funding of the auxiliary lane enhancements on the westbound side for 80, I believe. Would that be a correct assessment, or?
Rick may have more insight on that.
Yeah, so I think as you're aware, we're in the midst of updating the Sparta impact fee. And as part of that, we looked at projects and project cost, and staff from Rockland did bring up that Caltrans is basically pushing for that westbound auxiliary lane and is asked to include that cost in the updated cost for the interchange. So that's currently kind of laid out in the draft program. So the Sparta board should see that in a few months from now when we look to adopt the updated fee.
Great, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, I actually wanted to just let you know I'm recusing myself from this item because of my position with PG&E.
Okay, noted. Do we have any comments by the public?
Rick has something.
I would
Oh, I'm
I would
sorry.
like to add, Director Wilkins had asked about the cost for Sparta in the interim. I was able to pull up the numbers.
Okay.
So this current year, there is a available fund balance of about 10 million. As I mentioned, we have things programmed out with the additional 5.3. We end up with a minimum fund balance in fiscal year 24-25 of about 1.7 million. That's taking into account the extra cost.
And if I could quickly through the chair, I too don't want this entire morning to be about the funding measure, but I do think it's important to point something out that David raised about schedule, just so we all have awareness. He mentioned that, you know, the current construction schedule has this finishing up in July, but if it gets pushed out to the next CTC meeting for approval in May, that could go to October. I will tell you, it's my opinion that even if it does go in March and stays on schedule, the idea that this will be wrapped up in July, I think, is probably a stretch. Having a bit of background in overseeing some of this sort of stuff and the fact that there's fiber optics and the relocation of fiber optics in that corridor. If you go out there and try to find a sub-consultant right now to do that work, that's a very hard find. So I think it's just everybody needs to be aware that, you know, when those ballots are showing up, you know, in October of '24, it's highly likely that this project is still wrapping up construction. So there's probably still going to be K-rail out there and everything else. So just as a side note, just have awareness around that as well, because there's varying opinions as far as, so just FYI. Thank you.
Okay.
With that, I'll move to conditionally approve authorizing the executive director to negotiate an amended cooperative agreement with Caltrans for consideration of the I-80 auxiliary lanes project, subject to action by Sparta to increase the project's construction funding commitment to not to exceed $15.7 million, and authorize the chair and the executive director to execute and amend. I can't say that word, cooperative.
Yeah, you just did.
Agreement.
Broadway will second.
Say it, he just doesn't mean it.
Okay, roll call, please.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris recused. Cartwright. Aye. Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Under protest.
Under protest.
Okay, moving on to item N, Executive Director's Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if we could just get the next slide quickly. I'll move through this very quickly in the interest of time, knowing we have a Sparta board on the back end. Just as a reminder, we had a really great CTC event in January. Thank you to everybody who attended. We got really good feedback from CTC commissioners and staff. Just a couple of updates as far as state advocacy. We did reselect Mark Watts with Politico Group as our state advocate. So that will be coming to you for confirmation or, you know, contracts in March. We also have a new federal advocacy consultant. As many of you know, Santi Esposito decided to retire. We had 4 different consulting firms apply. We selected TFG and are currently negotiating with them.
I don't know them.
The Ferguson Group. We're calling them TFG because the Ferguson Group. Yeah, they're moving into branding because the original Ferguson, I think, is moving on. But we've already had a couple of phone calls with them. We're really pleased with them. I think they're going to be a great addition. That contract will also be coming to you for approval in March. We held interviews for our general communications consultant last Friday, and I can let you know that we will have a new general communications consultant in DKS. So they will be replacing AIM as our on-call general communications consultant. That too will be coming to you in March for approval. Rick just received 2 proposals for the electrification RFP, so we're going to move through the process of selecting someone on the electrification project. Probably what I want to spend a little bit, not just run right through, is the renegotiation of our MOU with SACOG. Mayor Joyner's already sort of brought up, and everybody is well aware of the fact that we've gone through this federal corrective action with SACOG together. That's now been put into place, and we are in this six county competitive round for sort of all sorts of federal funding, and we will continue to participate with them through a new ad hoc staff funding committee. But as part of the conversation with SACOG, we wanted to make sure that ourselves and PCTPA and our partner, RTPA and EDCTC, had recognition and protections into the future. And the best way we can achieve that right now in the near term is with our MOU. So we will be breaking open that MOU, which we've had since 2016, and renegotiating that with SACOG. So more to come on that. But we currently are a funding partner. We pass money back to SACOG to do air quality modeling and other things for us. So in many instances, we are a client of theirs. And so we want to make sure that is memorialized in those relationships, those financial partnerships, the planning process, all of that. So that work has just begun. As far as April board meeting, there is going to be the cap to cap. Chair Jones and myself, I know, are going to DC. I believe Mayor Joyner's, Mayor Howdeschelt is, Ken as well. So the recommendation is that we looked at what was coming in March and May, and we think we can get by with canceling this meeting for April. So wanted to sort of put that before you. We don't, I'll look if any concerns from the board on that one. No? And, okay, great. And then while we're talking about that as well, the PBA trip also conflicts with our October meeting. So we're recommending to move it from the 4th Wednesday to the 18th of October, if that works. So please be advised of that. With that, that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you so
Madam
much.
Chair, I just want to make a comment. Mark Wass has been appointed to our Pulaski County Planning Commission, representing District 5 from the Western Slope. So very good advocate for transportation and for Placer County.
Yes, sir.
Okay, item O, board direction to the staff?
I think they got it.
Yeah. Everybody's- Fight. There we go. Okay. Informational items, as provided on our, is there any other further business to come before this board?
Nope.
Okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.